Hello and welcome to our webinar today where we're talking with the FTC about children and AI. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to join me and my co-panelists today. Rukiya, I'm going to ask you to pull up the first slide with our beautiful photo so I can introduce my co-panelists. First and foremost, I have Rukiya Bonner, who is our current director of CARU, our Children's Advertising Review Unit. Rukiya is just celebrating her 1-year anniversary with us, and she's doing great work with the program and with the team. And we're going to talk about the work that she's been doing this year, specifically with regards to children and AI. And of course, our esteemed guest today is Michelle Rosenthal, who joins us from the Federal Trade Commission, where she's a senior attorney in their division of advertising practices, where she focuses on deceptive and unfair business practices in the advertising and technology space, and particularly those affecting kids and teens. And during her current role and in a prior stint at the FTC, Michelle has focused specifically on influencer marketing to kids and teens, social media, gaming, and AI-related harms, targeted advertising, COPPA, and privacy and data security and enforcement policy work. So I can't think of a better person to join us in this conversation today. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I guess I should probably introduce myself. I'm Dona Fraser, Senior Vice President of Privacy Initiatives here at BBB National Programs. I oversee several programs in the data privacy space, and CARU is one of the programs that still is under my purview. I joined here in 2017 as the director of CARU. So it still holds a special place in my heart. Let's go to our agenda so folks have a sense of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to give kind of a landscape of the AI laws. We'll talk about the FTC's role and the application of Section 5 of the FTC Act. And of course, we're going to talk about what CARU's doing in this space and best practices. And of course, we will save time for audience Q&A. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time and not familiar with who BBB National Programs is, we are an independent nonprofit organization in the self-regulatory space of both advertising, privacy, and dispute resolution. We have over a dozen independent industry self-regulation programs, accountability programs, DR programs, dispute resolution programs. And I like to say that we're here to hold businesses accountable to their best practices and standards with regards to their interaction with consumers. I think we have, some B2B stuff, but it's mostly we're dealing with companies who are dealing with consumers and who are oftentimes challenged with how do they show their accountability? How do they show that they're the good actors? And I like to say that we have the privilege of working with some of the best actors in the space. So I'm going to turn it over to Rukiya so she can talk more about the Children's Advertising Review Unit and kind of give a foundation to today's conversation.
Thanks so much, Donna. 50 years ago, in response to concern from federal legislators, CARU was established, the Children's Advertising Review Unit, which we call CARU. It was established to support self-regulation in the children's realm of advertising. CARU helps companies comply with laws and guidelines that protect children under age 13 from deceptive or inappropriate advertising and ensure that in an online environment, children's data is collected and handled responsibly. We're here today to have a conversation with the FTC, Michelle Rosenthal. We are so thrilled that we have a great relationship with the FTC. We often go to them and present them with scenarios and get advice. And when we do put out guidelines, guardrails, or guidance, we ensure that we are aligned with the FTC. Donna,
Yeah, I just realized I muted myself. So let's just take a look at AI at the federal level. It's obviously a top priority that so many organizations, as well as regulators and legislators, are talking about. This is the topic of the day. President Biden's executive order on AI obviously was kind of a call to action for all of us to really do something. Senator Schumer has been meeting with industry executives and leaders as Congress kind of comes up to speed on the uses of AI That bipartisan working group that he leads released a roadmap for AI policy. Some of the highlights of that working group include ensuring enforcement of existing laws for AI, including ways to address any gaps or unintended harmful bias, prioritizing the development of standards for testing to understand potential AI harms, and developing use case specific requirements for AI transparency, and obviously mitigating the threat of potential long-term risk scenarios, as well as establishing a strong, comprehensive federal data privacy framework. We're still holding our breath on the federal data privacy bill, which would apply to AI. And I would argue that many of our existing laws already do apply to AI. These all demonstrate that Congress is working on this issue area, and maybe we'll see legislation soon. I've never been good at predicting this, so I'm not gonna start today. But Michelle, that leads me to my first question for you. And how is the FTC thinking about AI enforcement under its existing authority?
So I think you raise a good point that many of the existing laws already cover AI. I think there's a tendency every time we see new technology to wonder whether the FTC Act is sufficient to address the potential harms. And I think the reality is that Section 5 is incredibly malleable. It gives us authority to enforce against unfair and deceptive business practices, and that's going to apply no matter what technology we're dealing with. And, I do think certainly sometimes we have complicated business models where you've got a number of different players and perhaps not all of them are consumer facing. We saw that, for example, in the targeted advertising space, but we still found a way to bring enforcement cases in that space, even though not every player in the ecosystem was, consumer facing. I guess I wouldn't go so far as to suggest that in some cases it might not help to enhance our authority with additional legislation. And of course, we've seen Congress do that. We saw them do it with COPPA. We saw Congress do it with COPPA and kids' privacy, and we see Congress considering it on the AI front and also on the kids' online safety front. But ultimately, I think Section 5 is, going to allow us to address harm stemming from new technologies, and in this case, AI.
Great.
Go to the next slide. You can. Yep. Thanks. The FTC plays a crucial role in enforcement to ensure consumers aren't the victims of deceptive and predatory business practices on both the advertising and side and the privacy side. We have seen the Commission exercise its authority under Section 5, which you mentioned is malleable, of the FTC Act to correct violations and set the standard of what companies and other businesses should be doing. Specifically, we know that the FTC has been concerned about advertising to kids and has made that a priority. Because the FTC used Section 5 to take actions related to companies with child-directed services, apps, websites, and products, what are some of the trends, Michelle, that you're seeing, and what are the FTC's enforcement priorities, please?
Sure. So, the FTC is always focused on all consumers, but we are especially on alert when it comes to vulnerable groups like minors. I think what we're seeing is new in many ways, but in some ways, not much has changed, right? Advertisers have always had a focus on kids and teens because I think they get a lot of bang for their buck, right? We have, kids are able to influence their parents, or maybe that's just my household. But they also have discretionary income at times, and they make for, they have a long life ahead of them. So they're going to be a consumer for a long time. And so oftentimes, companies are focused on kids when creating brand awareness or when advertising. So that's something we've always seen. I think what the FTC is focused on is, are there new technologies like AI that are exacerbating the types of harms that we've all, either they're causing, it's the technology that's creating the deception or leading to a more deceptive advertisement, or it's we're creating privacy or online safety or other health-related harms. And so I'll kind of talk about some examples to give you to kind of provide more color to what I'm talking about, right? We see a lot of companies rolling out new generative AI products, and some of them are available to minors, and some of them are being rolled out quite quickly to keep up with competition. And so we want to ensure that companies who have young users are really thinking about the risk of harm to those users and working to mitigate those risks. So have you properly tested your AI product before rolling it out? Or, and have you attempted to mitigate the risk to potentially harmful responses, right? We can imagine, and we see already toys coming out that are AI powered. And so these are the types of things I think that you need to be thinking about when there's going to be that interaction between the AI and the child or the teen. Kids come with a different risk profile. And I think that that's one thing that I'll probably say many times throughout the webinar today. When it comes to advertising, we've always expected advertisers to ensure that their ads are not deceptive or unfair. But with social media and with gaming and now with AI, I think there are more opportunities to present ads in ways that may be misleading to kids. So one example is we issued our stealth advertising report, which I refer in shorthand to the blurred advertising report, because I'm talking about when ads and content are blended together, and particularly when kids are the audience. So we released this report in September of 2023, and basically, this was an issue that we had seen for decades, right? With native advertising, we've often seen the blending of ads and content, but it's really come to the forefront, I think, with social media and with gaming and virtual reality worlds. And so what we said in that report was, basically, this is an issue when kids are not able to understand the difference between the advertising and the content, right? And we can see how that would be further complicated by the use of AI influencers on social media or avatars that are AI powered in games or virtual reality worlds. And although adults may realize that we're not dealing with a real person in these particular examples, kids may not realize that. And frankly, some adults may not realize that either, but kids may not realize that. And even those kids who do kind of understand it still form these parasocial relationships with some of these entities and tend to trust them. And we've learned through studies and discussions with experts that this is all because of kids kind of developing, the fact that they're still developing cognitively. So these are things that come into play. I'll just mention a couple other kind of quick things, which
Please,
is,
yes.
On the privacy front, for example, we are concerned about AI-related risks. We know that large language models get massive amounts of training data, and on that front, I think privacy and security is top of mind for us, and we think it should be top of mind for companies in this space. And so again, I think those are kind of some of the bigger things that we are focused on right now, particularly as they apply to kids.
Thank you. And as technology becomes more and more advanced, I think that line is going to be seamless. So when you talk about adults, you're talking about this one right here. Another question for you, Michelle. Are there any recent Section 5 cases in the children's space that relate either tangentially or directly to the use of AI?
Yeah, we have a few cases on the privacy side that I think are relevant. And so we had the recent Amazon Alexa matter, where the FTC alleged that Amazon violated COPPA and the FTC Act by retaining children's voice recordings, which it used to improve its speech recognition algorithm. And the FTC also alleged that Amazon failed to honor users' and parents' requests to delete that data, and then retained it. And again, we're using it to improve the algorithm. So under the settlement, the company is required to delete inactive accounts and certain voice recordings and geolocation information for kids, and they'll be prohibited from using such data to train algorithms going forward. So that's one case that I think is relevant. And then on that last piece, we do have a few other cases that I think are also relevant. Again, we've said in Emoto and in the Weight Watchers case that where information is illegally obtained, meaning COPPA was violated because parental consent was not obtained, for example, that the companies are not able to continue to use that data to train models and algorithms, and that any model or algorithm that was trained with that data cannot be used. And so I think, it's important for companies because you don't want to start from scratch, right? Companies spend a lot of time working on these algorithms, and they often power their business models. And so it's really important to think about what data is being used to train those models, because if it was obtained illegally, or if it was obtained without verifiable parental consent, then you may have a problem down the road. So that's from a privacy side. Unfortunately, I can only speak about public cases, but on the advertising front, I can say, I would urge anyone to look at our AI blog series, to look at our voice cloning challenge, our stealth advertising report. I think you can kind of get a sense of how the FTC is looking at these issues on the advertising side from looking at those things.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And the FTC has robust guidance in connection with influencers and endorsers. Please talk about the application of the guidance as it relates to generative AI.
Yeah, so in the revised endorsement guides, which we released last year, we clarified that an endorser includes what could, I'm gonna actually look at my notes for this because
Yes.
I want to get it right. I want to get the quote right. What could be or appear to be an individual, group, or institution. And then in the Federal Register notice, in responding to commenters, we explained that the new definitional language addresses virtual influencers. It also addresses the writers of fake reviews and non-existent entities that purport to give endorsements. So I think, it's clear that AI generated content is now, is not excluded from the guides and is clearly covered. I think for adults, the mere fact that an influencer may be AI generated, or maybe an AI generated avatar or bot, doesn't necessarily mean that the endorsement is deceptive, but it could in certain contexts. And given that kids are still developing cognitively, they may not always understand that a company is creating an AI avatar or influencer to endorse a product. So I think it's particularly important, again, because kids it's a different audience than the average adult consumer.
Thank you.
Sure.
You can go to the next. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we all know that Congress is working, at the federal level, with regard to either federal data privacy bill, what AI can look like, what it will look like. The states have been impatient, and are not waiting for a federal data privacy bill or anything that's going to address AI on a federal level. And they've been acting much quicker in responding to the changes that AI is creating in the landscape. The map that you have on your screen here, which is courtesy of Hush Blackwell Law Firm, really outlines where the AI laws have been popping up. And it wouldn't surprise me that if by the end of this webinar, 2 or 3 more laws have passed, because it's just happening at such a quick pace, and I can't keep up. I think I just heard a gavel hitting somewhere in one of our 50 states. But we should note that Colorado passed an AI law, right? So we're at least are at 5 states that have enacted AI legislation, and we're likely going to see many more. Seeing AI legislation at the state level is also an indicator of, again, how rapid the advancements are in emerging technology, and the laws will hopefully provide some guidance to, what we're calling this Wild West, while making sure that consumers' best interests are being maintained. So Michelle, I'll turn to you again. As states continue to develop these AI laws, does the FTC have any resources that the states can use as guidance?
Yeah, I think certainly, obviously, they can look at our cases that are public, and not just the cases, like not just the counts, but also the settlement agreements, right? What we've put in the order, which, oftentimes when you look at an FTC order, you're thinking, okay, this is what the FTC would like to see. It's considered fencing in relief for a particular company, but it's also how we think about a particular set of facts. So I think it's helpful to look at those. They can review our biometric policy statement, which I think could be adaptable in some ways in this particular space. They could subscribe to our blogs. As I think many people know, we've got a lot of, we've spoken a lot about AI in our business and technology blogs. And so I often tell people to make sure that you're subscribed to that and seeing all of the stuff that comes out, because it's helpful, again, to see how the commission is thinking about these things. And then, there are other federal resources as well. We're not the only folks on the block. Obviously, there are frameworks that we've seen, resources from NIST, and the OSTP framework for an AI Bill of Rights, I think, would be probably useful as well.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great resource too. So the resources that you've indicated, as well as a link to this map, will be included in the resources for those who are attending this webinar. You'll get the presentation along with those links. So I just want to make note of that. And I also do want to remind people that they can submit their questions in chat, and we'll keep looking at those questions, and we'll answer either as we go along or at the end of the webinar. I think we can go to the next slide. So this is this map, which we're about to get off the screen at some point. We're going to have to condense this at some point, but this kind of shows you what's happening globally, and down to a state level, where you kind of see lines through it means that these state laws are being challenged, most likely on constitutional grounds. So this is kind of giving you kind of the general landscape of laws that are protecting kids online, and the use of AI may be part of all those data collection practices. I do want to point out one thing that's happening is that there are a lot of laws, and this map does not indicate it, but I do want to make note of it. It would be remiss of me to not mention this, is that there are a lot of laws on the state level and also globally that talk about sensitive data, and oftentimes sensitive data includes children. So I want companies to pay attention to that, right? It may not be explicitly a law that is about children, but if it's talking about sensitive data, oftentimes they're talking about children, and that's just something to remain mindful of. So Michelle, obviously, again, the whole world's thinking about AI. Aside from all of these different regulations, is the commission looking globally to keep an eye on trends that other countries have in relation to AI and its impact on children?
Absolutely. I think we're very interested to see what happens with the AI Act in the EU. Which is quite nascent. I mean, and similar, the UK Children's Code, right? Like, we're all of these things that we see coming out in Europe and in other places globally. We're looking to see what's going to happen. We also have, the Digital Services Act, and we're interested in that as well. And kind of some of these touch on AI, some don't, some are, but it's all kind of in this same space. And we want to see how companies are working with other regulators. We also talk to other regulators, right? We often have conversations. We have someone, we've had lots of chats with regulators in various countries to talk about, what they are doing, how they're thinking about things when they feel like they've hit a brick wall on something, or we feel like we've hit a brick wall on something. We try to kind of talk and think about ways to look at different issues and harms. And we also have, like, right now, we actually have someone in our office who's been doing a detail. She was one of the main drafters of the Digital Services Act, and she's come from the European Commission and has been working with me on a number of matters that I'm working on, and has been a great resource. So we really do like to keep the door open to have these conversations. And also, as you said, we're looking to see just what happens with enforcement, right? Like, it feels like, every week there's more information about, the EU or some other global entity government entity looking at particular cases. And so we are following that closely.
Great.
You can go to the next slide, please. This brings us to CARU's advertising guidelines. CARU's advertising guidelines have been an industry standard for years. As a matter of fact, prior to my time here at CARU, I was the Director of Standards and Practices at Warner Brothers Discovery, and we used CARU's advertising guidelines to create our own network standards and practices for our family and children's nets. So we want to ensure that the commercials, that the ads are not deceptive, not unfair, or inappropriate for children. We also, in our guidelines, which the most recent update was 2022, we ensure that the guidelines are applicable to all forms of media, including digital media, and influencers. Our most recent guidance came out fourth quarter last year, and it said that our guidelines are applicable to the metaverse. So much like the flexibility and the nimble nature of Section 5, our guidelines are also applicable throughout all forms of media, and they also apply to media as emerging media. So we put out guidance in connection with the metaverse. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are some of our basic longstanding tenets and principles in connection with our guidelines, but we have robust guidelines as it pertains to children's advertising, ranging from the claims, safety issues, how things are portrayed, and we include even the special responsibility of advertisers to be diverse and reflect the diverse nature of our nation. With that, Michelle, can you talk us through the importance of having guidelines that protect children specifically? And Donna kind of touched on it with the sensitive nature, but there is a specific responsibility. But please tell us about the importance of protecting children.
Yes, happy to do that. So I think certain things are quite obvious, right? Kids are a unique group and they're still developing cognitively. So I think consumer expectations and understandings are different for younger consumers. This is in part why we issued our stealth advertising report, or I call it the blurred advertising report. And not to keep kind of going back to that, but I think when we put out, when we were considering the endorsement guides and the updates to the guides, one of the questions was, is this the same for kids? Should we treat kids the same? And the reality is, like, no, we can't treat kids the same because they don't understand the things that the disclaimer that might work for an adult isn't necessarily going to work for a child. They're not necessarily going to understand it. And so, that's why I often tell people, like, even though our stealth advertising report was not focused on AI specifically, like there's not like a section on AI. If you read it, I think you'll see that all of the principles apply in this space as well. And there's a lot of stuff that's quite relevant because we're talking about influencers and avatars, and so it does focus on some AI generated content and advertising. But in that report, we looked at a lot of studies and research on kids' cognitive development. And the reason that I think that's relevant is if you go back to our basic FTC deception statement, right? The statement is, it makes clear that we examine a practice from the perspective of a consumer acting reasonably in the circumstances. And that if the practice or advertising is directed at a particular group, then the commission would examine the reasonableness from the perspective of that group. And so I think it's important for people to keep that in mind, that when we're talking about something that's kind of where kids are the audience, we're going to look at it as from, will a child acting reasonably in the circumstances understand this, or will they be misled? And so I think it's really important that we remember that kids are different from adults, usually, and really think about that, because the disclaimer on the bottom of the screen, oftentimes isn't enough for an adult. Certainly, it's not going to be enough for a kid. So I think we really have to think about, and that's what our recommendations in the stealth advertising report reflect.
No, thank you for that. And I know even as we developed our metaverse guardrails, we waited until your guidance came out, the stealth perspective came out, to make sure that we were aligned. And one of the most notable things when you're talking about what children understand in that disclaimer, it was notable that it should be written and able to be heard. So yeah. I thought that was a really dynamic point to be made so that children can understand it, that small, inconspicuous script in white that's in very tiny font. It needs to be said. It needs to happen orally also. So that was wonderful guidance. And that's one thing that, again, to ensure that we're in alignment with you all. You can go to the next slide, please. And just like the metaverse compliance warning, when we made sure and reiterated to let advertisers, brands, companies know that CARU's advertising guidelines applies, we did something similar. The 1st of May, we released a compliance warning in connection with AI to let people know, to give notice that CARU's advertising guidelines still apply. The same the rules of the road are the same. It's a reminder that the current guidelines extend to the use of AI in advertising directed to children. As new technology emerges, CARU will continue to assess the need for guidance and release resources as needed. For those of you that are active in the metaverse, we recommend that you check out CARU's metaverse guidelines. They're available online, but we want to make sure that the guidelines again are nimble and AI is covered. Michelle, why are practices involving advertising as it relates to children important to keep in mind with the rise of AI?
I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, which is that AI tools can really create a plethora of hyper realistic, targeted fake ads, right? Not necessarily fake; it could be real, but still deceptive. And that can manipulate people. And again, it can manipulate adults. It certainly could manipulate kids who don't understand motive, an advertising motive. And again, this kind of gets to we talked a lot about this in the report. Not to keep plugging the report, I apologize, but we do kind of get at this issue. And I think it's the first time that we've talked about it in a while. Like, we've always looked at kids advertising, but it's the first time in a while that we've gone back and said, look, here's the research, here's what we know about kids' cognitive development. We had a workshop leading up to the report that had a panel of doctors, all either MDs or PhDs, who kind of spoke to these issues. So I do think it's important, again, to go back to that, because it's a reminder that these things are going to be particularly deceptive for this particular group. So I think those one-on-one interactions with a chatbot or an avatar or an AI influencer are just they're going to encourage user trust, particularly among kids. And so I think that's what we need. I think that would be probably like top of mind for me in terms of what we should be kind of thinking about and keeping in mind when we think about advertising using AI. And we also discussed this in a few AI business blog in our business blog series. They're titled, I'm trying to remember there. I think there's one titled The Luring Test. And then there's one that's like Deception for Sale, or AI Deception for Sale, that I think would be relevant here.
Thanks,
So we
Michelle.
have a question. I'm sorry. So we have a question from the audience that I think now is a good time to ask. And I'm going to pose this to both of you because I don't think this is just a question for Michelle. The question is, how do you see the difference between an animated or puppet or toy character versus an AI generated character?
I just got this question internally. We were just having this conversation.
Okay.
Rukiya, do you want to weigh in before I?
I'm happy to weigh in after Michelle, especially if you just had the conversation.
So I'm not sure, I guess, what the context is, but like, we were having this conversation with a lot of like advertisers for decades have been using characters, for example, to advertise. I don't want to call anyone out, so I'm just
anything.
Let's just say a food, right? Okay. Food. Let's say food. And I think it's really hard for me to answer. Actually, this kind of reminds me that I haven't offered my usual disclaimer, which is my views are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the commission or any particular commissioner. And I will say, in this case, it really is hard to answer because it depends on the context. It's always going to depend on the context, and it's going to be context specific. But I do think that a company that has, like a cartoon character, for example, that's part of its brand is a little bit different than having an influencer that appears to be independent and appears to be providing an endorsement, for example, in an independent way, right? Like, do you have the same character that's always around, that's always part of your advertisements, that's on the like box that your food is in, and like in many different places where there may be this understanding that that's just the brand, versus like you're looking at an avatar in a game that is like talking about a product that is not really part of the game, and you don't really understand that avatar is like essentially saying things based on like the fact that the game developer is getting paid to say those things. I mean, I think that there's just a difference, and it's always going to depend on the context, but those are kind of some differentiating factors, I think, that I would consider.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought immediately went to, my answer is the same one, it depends. But my thought immediately went into deep fakes, and it went into people perhaps using IP to, whether it's use the voice of a well-known or beloved character to endorse something that's not necessarily connected with the company. So my thought initially went to the deep fakes and the danger of that, and how some companies are using invisible watermarks to show when AI has been used, and how it will be important in the future to kind of use kind of forensic devices to see, is this real? Is this actually from the company? But I thought about people misusing other people's beloved animated characters, IP properties to reflect, to say things and do things that may be inappropriate, that may at best be deceptive or misleading to children. So that's kind of where my mind went when they talked about that. So, okay. Hope that answers the person's question in the chat.
I'm sure it did. We could pull the slide deck back up, because I think
we were talking a little bit about special concerns as it relates to AI, Michelle. And I was going to ask if you see what are some unique challenges or issues that you think will be important to address with the rise of AI?
I think we are gonna start to see more AI influencers and more avatars, particularly in, as virtual reality becomes even more popular, in gaming and social media. I do think that how we are able to make sure that those things are not misleading are going to be challenging when it comes to kids, because again, like, this standard disclaimer isn't necessarily going to be enough, right? It likely is not going to be enough. And so I think that's going to be a big challenge. I also think another thing that I've at least been concerned about is, like, what does this mean from a privacy standpoint, right? If a kid is interacting with an avatar and they think it's their friend, right? What kind of information are they giving up that's then being used about them for advertising or for other purposes? So that's an issue that I think is also going to be hard, just when it comes to consumer and kids' expectations and understanding of, like, what kind of conversation they're actually having. And I also think, like, it's easy for us to say now, like, oh, well, the AI influencer on social media is clearly not a real person, right? And we can argue that maybe, like, the adult would get it, but the kid might not get it, and go back and forth. But I think there may be a world a few years from now where even adults aren't going to be able to realize, like, whether they're looking at someone, an avatar, an influencer who's real or literally created by AI. So I do think that as technology advances and AI becomes, it's not, oftentimes now it's a little bit obvious, right? And I say that even when it comes to the content that you're getting from an AI, like when a child who can ask questions because you have an AI toy or an AI chatbot, like, the content is lacking still in some ways. But as it advances, I think it's just going to create more challenges in terms of kids being able to differentiate between what's real and what's not. So that, I think, is a big one. And then the final thing is the training data sets I continue to worry about when it comes to AI from a privacy standpoint, and from a just kind of what's being used to train these AI, either the LLM or, like, these other AI products. So that's another thing that I think will continue to be a challenge, because once it's trained with that data, like, it's there, right? It's out there. So I think those are some of the big things that I see as challenges going forward.
And you mean being out there, being, like, not able to accommodate deletion requests and things that, okay. Yeah.
Well, maybe, perhaps, right? Like, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Or it's like you've trained the AI and nobody really knows how it's been trained, and can you take it back? Like,
right.
Toothpaste is out of the tube, if you will, right? Like, what can you, you can't necessarily go back and change it. And again, we have said in some of these cases, like, you can't use that algorithm if it's been trained using, but that's going to be more complicated as you think about, like, generative AI. So.
Thanks, Michelle. How do you envision AI being used in advertising within the children's space? And I asked that we were thinking about as we went through our guidelines and as we put out the compliance warning, we kind of went through some scenarios. And I guess that was a question for myself. I misread, but we were just kind of talking about some of the ways. And honestly, Michelle, I've seen some situations where it's virtually indistinguishable. And that's to a trained eye, someone who I purport to have a keen eye. But I mean, sometimes it just gets down to, okay, there's 17 toes here. So perhaps perhaps this is not, or this is a realistic generated image, but it's not real. But we thought about situations where there could be children that are depicted, realistic looking children depicted in situations. And some of the things we thought about was safety still matters. So if you have a child by a pool promoting a pool product, there still needs to be an adult present, whether that adult is AI generated or otherwise, but all of those rules of the road still apply. We even think about the technology and its ability to do 3D imagery and to show products in ways that perhaps we've never seen before, show them assembled in ways perhaps we've never seen them assembled, or do things. And we want to ensure that the rules of the road again still apply, and what that product appears to do, it should actually be able to do in real life. An ordinary child should be able to duplicate and mimic and use the product in the same way depicted. So we just thought about some of the unique situations or some ways that AI could be used. And really, we thought it could be used interchangeably with the way animation, CGI, it can just be used in any way. And we just see that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And back to the pool example, I think one of the things that I think would be helpful is to kind of remember why the rule exists in the first place, or think about why the rule exists, right? If the rule exists because we don't want to show kids that it's okay to be around a pool without their parents, then does it really matter that it's an AI generated kid versus a real kid, right? So I think sometimes going back to what was the purpose of the rule in the first place as I think is helpful to think about when you're thinking about whether it should apply to AI. But the reality is, as you say, it should always apply, in the AI space. I can't really think of an example where it shouldn't.
I can't either, Michelle.
Yeah. And I think that the context is always going to matter, right? And Rukiya, one thing you kind of touched on, which I want people to really, one of the takeaways here, and there'll be a link to it in the resources, is the CARU advertising guidelines, right? So we talk about parental supervision. Though that is in the CARU advertising guidelines, right? And it's not just parental supervision. If you're showing a kid in a pool, they're a young child, they need to have their safety gear on, right? If there's a kid riding a bicycle, they need to have a helmet on. I mean, I didn't wear one when I was a kid, but that was a different story, but wasn't required then. But all of these things are outlined in our advertising guidelines. So I would encourage companies to really take a close look at that, even with regards to food portioning, right? And how can AI as a tool be used to manipulate that, right? So our guidelines talk about, how you advertise food, not the what, but the how you advertise food, and with regards to sizing and realistic portions and things like that. What we won't allow is, a cereal bowl that's overflowing with cereal, right? It's all over the counter. So how does AI as a tool manipulate that? So those are all things that I think we should be thinking about and looking at.
Or even where you're eating the cereal. It needs to be at a table. You can't be at the skate park eating a bowl of cereal, or
we can't be on the moon eating a bowl of cereal.
Well, maybe in a few years.
I know. See?
Absolutely. And to that point, Donna, in providing those advertising guidelines to everyone, we do want to point out that we are here to help. So we have several programs actually that can help advertisers, companies, endorsers get through any issues that they may be having. One of the many wonderful services we offer a la carte is a pre-screening service. Donna will talk to you about the supporters and their role, which they get unlimited amount of pre-screening services, but we provide a pre-screening service to anyone. We will look at your campaign from beginning to end, whether it's in the development stage, script, fine cut, rough cut, animatic. We'll look at your campaign, evaluate it, and provide guidance to ensure that you are in compliance with CARU guidelines. We will help to get you in compliance. We and we turn around these services in less than 48 hours. So if you give us something, and the value that it adds is it saves you money because you don't have to reshoot. You don't have to go back and add a chyron or a lower third or some kind of disclaimer that should be necessary from the beginning that you just may not be aware of. What we find in this space, especially the kids space, is everybody wants to be a good actor. No one wants to be out of compliance. It's most of the times, even when we go and bring about cases, when we see instances of non-compliance, people want to be on the right side of good when it comes to protecting children, when it comes to ensuring that children know when they're encountering an ad. So this is a service that we this is a service that we have to help you so that we're not just putting this out here. We're saying, come to us, we will evaluate your campaign and whether that's privacy issues, contests, an online service, promotional website, advertisement. We'll review it and give you feedback to ensure that you're compliant. So any potentially problematic.
And we'll look at a whole campaign, right? So one submission can be the script. The next submission could be the beta version, as long as it's all the same campaign. And that could be weeks apart, however long it takes you to finish your campaign. We'll look at the whole kind of soup to nuts thing.
Okay.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the other way that we're here to support industry is through our COPPA Safe Harbor program. CARU was the first FTC-approved COPPA Safe Harbor when COPPA was legislated back in 1998, and it went into effect in 2000. We were the first COPPA Safe Harbor. So we've been in this space since day one. And really what a COPPA Safe Harbor program is intended to do is just what safe harbor means, right? Is to shield you from potential fines and investigations by the Federal Trade Commission and or possibly a state AG. There have been a few state cases with regards to COPPA. Both Texas and New York have brought cases with regards to COPPA. And our goal is to, again, ensure that you are compliant with the law. We are the only COPPA Safe Harbor program that's fully staffed by attorneys. And what we're also looking at any advertising campaigns that relate to that product. I want to be clear, though, that we are not safe harboring your ad practices. We're only safe harboring your privacy practices as it relates to COPPA. We're not safe harboring anything else, but we will look at it. We will evaluate, we will provide feedback. We're looking at your mobile apps, your websites, your IoT. I think we have a couple of smart TVs in our program. We have podcast developers in our program. So anything, and I think, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this is all going to change with AI, the types of products that we'll look at. We're looking at platforms. So it really does run the gamut of the types of products, and I call them all services and products that we look at under our COPPA Safe Harbor program. It's an extremely robust program. We're doing a deep dive. We're looking at your privacy notices, your terms of service. If you have a EULA for a product, an end user license agreement, we're looking at it and we're clicking on everything to ensure that what you say you're doing is actually what you're doing. We're looking at it from the user end. We want to make sure that the user experience is what you say it is, or what it is that you intend it to be. I encourage companies to come to us at the earliest stages of developing their products, because the COPPA Safe Harbor program is truly intended to be a privacy by design program. Much to Rukiya's point about ad campaigns, what you don't want to do is come to us with a completely baked product, and then we evaluate it and say you missed the mark here, and here, and now you have to re-engineer your entire product to be compliant. That's very costly, very time consuming. And oftentimes, you may decide that you have to take something off the market temporarily so that you can be compliant, so that you can avoid scrutiny by the Federal Trade Commission or state AGs, something none of us want. So, I would encourage you to scan the QR code. We'll have a link to our COPPA Safe Harbor program if you want more information about it. But again, we're here to help. We can go to the next slide. So as Rukiya mentioned, we have CARU supporters, and CARU supporters are BBB national partners who have chosen to not just support self-regulation as part of BBB national programs, but have a vested interest business-wise with regards to children, right? They may be companies that have products that are directed to children. They may be in the children's space, or in a mixed audience space, whatever it is, but they have a vested interest in ensuring that both privacy and ad practices regarding children are fair and transparent. And they work with us, right? They are our partners in developing our guidelines. They were part of our metaverse working group last year when we developed our metaverse guardrails. We now, as of May, have launched an AI working group with our supporters. So for those companies who are on today's webinar, who are not our supporters and are interested in learning more about how you can have a seat at the table to help us develop our guardrails for AI, and any other future development that we do, I would encourage you to reach out to us to learn how to become a CARU supporter. The logos you'll see here represent the majority of our supporters, and they run the gamut from the toy companies to the food and beverage industry, to platforms. So, the more people that are CARU supporters, the more people that are at the table, the more robust the conversation is. And I think the more engaging it can be, and obviously I think the results are actually better, right? The more people we have at the table, the results are better, because if we can hear from whether it's ad agencies, platforms, developers, third parties, first parties, whoever it is in the space, I think that makes for a much more robust product when we're developing our guardrails. So I will leave it there. Here you have on the screen kind of our takeaways and our best practices. But while people are reading that, I want to ask the two of you, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a little bit. I know we didn't plan for this. We didn't rehearse this. So go with me. Go with me. I'm going to play devil's advocate because I'm sitting, as we do this webinar, you guys know I'm taking a break from another conference that I'm at right now. And we're talking about AI. And the question that is coming up is, are we all getting, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not taking a position here. I want to be clear. But are we getting, and when I say we, I mean the collective we, like the world, are we getting ahead of ourselves with AI? Is AI just a tool? Do we need a law regarding AI? Or is AI simply a tool that we need to find ways to put guardrails around? But do we need a specific AI law, right? I mean, the EU is developing an AI Act, and the EU is going to do what the EU is going to do. But do we need a law? Do we need regulations specific to AI, or do the laws that we already have? And we talked about this, right? We have copyright laws, we have Section 5, we have all these other things I think that can apply to AI. So are we just looking at it? Are we being a little nervous, right? I think people forget that we've been engaging with AI, honestly, since the 70s. This is not new. It seems new. It feels new because we're talking about it in a new way. And I think ChatGPT made people curious and also nervous. And I think it elevated the conversation about potential harms. And maybe that's why we're seeing all these conversations, because once harms become identified, everyone's ire goes up and like, we got to do something. We don't know what we're going to do, but we must do something because we've now identified a significant amount of harms.
Okay. Well, and this is just personal, Rukiya Bonner. I watch a lot of sci-fi. So from that side, I'm a little bit scared.
You're not in reality. You're not even dealing with reality anymore.
In the things that I've seen, especially when I had to screen things for Science Channel, you're right. I've seen some things. They do not necessarily reflect reality. I do think I am in favor of guardrails. I am in favor of guidance, because I do think the existing laws in connection with deception, I think that is the key word, so that people are not deceived. We were that to me is the key, to ensure that people are not deceived. And we do have laws in place for that, existing laws in place. But I do think that it's important for people to understand how to apply, or I think that it would be helpful for people to have scenarios to know, okay, well, let me use a watermark in this scenario. Perhaps this needs a disclaimer so that people are not deceived. Perhaps this needs this, so that people can use it responsibly. But I think responsible use to ensure that there is not deception, to ensure that, because if you talk about laws, those same laws that may be intended to, there's a balance, Donna, and as a Libra, I'm going to stand firm on that. There's a balance, because if we say too much perhaps it may hinder the technology that goes through and filters for inappropriate imagery. Perhaps there's something that would hinder that that innovation and protection. But I think that seeking a balance is key, and that giving people guardrails and giving people tangible ways that they can apply learnings, that they can apply guidance to label things or to use AI in a way that it's not deceptive is key and going to continue to be key.
Michelle?
So I would go back. Well, I think it's this is like my lawyer answer. I think it depends, right? I think it depends on what space you're talking about. If you're talking about consumer, deception, unfairness, as I said earlier, I do think that our existing authority works. To Rukiya's point, sometimes guidance is helpful in these spaces, and it is why we often we do our blogs and we do other things. And we like to release various forms of guidance on various topics because sometimes it is helpful. But I do think that our existing statute works in that space. In other spaces, I haven't quite thought about it in every way. Like I haven't thought about every law that might apply and whether it would need to be tweaked or whatever. Me personally, just Michelle Rosenthal, not an FTC employee, but just in my personal life, I worry about misinformation. And I worry just that AI, I think, again, as it continues to improve upon itself, it will become more and more realistic. And so that's an issue in the deception and unfairness space, but it's also could be an issue from like a misinformation standpoint. So there is a little part of me that has thought about that personally, but is not quite, the FTC's focus is on commercial speech.
Right.
So yes, I guess that's my answer.
I had completely forgot about misinformation and about AI hallucination, and not just the synthetic content, but the hallucination aspect of it. So that is a very good point in terms of misinformation. What happens when it doesn't have that in the learning model? Of course, bias in the learning model. So you think about all of those things, and the possibility for misinformation is grand. So
yeah. Before we wrap up, one last question. Earlier, Michelle, you had talked about how the FTC engages with regulators outside the US, and you're looking at what's happening outside the US with regards to different models. How does, the EU has a different view on privacy in general. They have a different view on the role that parents and kids should have, right? I think that they're more willing to give autonomy to kids and teens where we are not, right? Our laws here, at least with regards to privacy, are very, the burden is on the parent. It's very parent driven. The children virtually have no say. They're going to do what they're going to do, but we're not seeking consent from them yet. And I think we're evolving a little bit, I think, under certain laws, right? Under California, there's and other state laws, there's some talk about consent from 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds. But in general, the model, and I think it's a cultural thing between how the US views our citizens, and privacy is it's a cultural thing there. Here it's a right, and all that sort of thing, right? So in looking at that, is it truly helpful? And do you think that there's going to be an evolution? Are we possibly moving to a different type of model where there's going to be more autonomy? Are we going to be more aligned with GDPR at some point with regards to privacy rights?
That's a hard one for me to answer for a number of reasons. In part because I'm not in the privacy division, even though I used to be. So I try not to make grand statements on their behalf. But I would say, look, I think from an FTC perspective, I think one of the things you've probably heard some of our commissioners say, particularly I know our chair has said this, is we actually are concerned about putting too much of an onus on parents. And I think you've seen a little bit in some of our orders, some of our settlement agreements, that we've tried to shift to default settings, like having defaults that are more protective rather than requiring the parent to make those decisions. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily, I'm not sure that necessarily aligns with everything in the GDPR per se, but I do think like we have been thinking about like, is this kind of notice and consent structure, like, does that work? And are we putting too much onus on parents to read every privacy policy, which I, as like a recovering privacy attorney, don't read every privacy policy, right? And so, so I do think that that is one thing that we're thinking about, is that kind of like, the default setting, the concept of the default setting versus, putting all this on the parent to make these choices at every step and with every interaction that their kids are having.
Yeah.
But yeah, the kind of broader question is hard to answer, I think. You can ask one of our commissioners what they think.
Yeah, no. It's food for thought, and I wanted people to just kind of think about that as well.
Yeah.
We have reached time. So Michelle, thank you so much for your insights today. Thank you for the conversation. I suspect that this is not the last of our conversations with regard to children and AI. And again, thank you for those people who have joined us today. You'll be receiving a thank you email with the presentation, with our resources. And we'll also link to many of the resources that Michelle indicated in our conversation today. So again, Michelle and Rukiya, thank you so much for your expertise and insights.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks, Michelle.